This is a rebroadcast episode that's publishing during the July 4th holiday of 2023. In this episode, I'm speaking with Fawn Germer, who is the author of Coming Back: How to Win the Job You Want When You've Lost the Job You Need. I've used a lot of concepts from Fawn's book. My favorite is being relevant is more important than your experience. Cue the music.
Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast, brought to you by Career Pivot. This podcast is where those of us in the second half of life come together to discuss how to repurpose our careers for the 21st century. Come listen to career experts give you proven strategies. Listen to people like you tell their stories on how they repurpose their careers. And finally, get your questions answered. Your host, Mark Miller, has made 6 career pivots over the last 30 years. He understands this is not about jumping out of the frying pan into a fire, but rather to create a plan where you make clear, actionable steps or pivots to a better future career. Are you ready to repurpose your career?
Welcome to episode 327 of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. My name is Mark Miller, and I'll be your host every Monday for discussion on what it's like to repurpose your career. This is a rebroadcast episode that's publishing during the July 4th holiday of 2023. In this episode, I'm speaking with Fawn Germer, who is the author of Coming Back: How to Win the Job You Want When You've Lost the Job You Need. I've used a lot of concepts from Fawn's book. My favorite is being relevant is more important than your experience. This podcast was originally published in March of 2021, so you'll get a feel for the timing and our discussions of the pandemic. Let me read some of her bio. Fawn Germer is the irreverent, best-loved, best-selling author of 9 books, including the Oprah book, Hard-Won Wisdom. She has been a keynote speaker for more than 80 Fortune 500 companies and was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize 4 times for her work as an investigative reporter. Fawn's first book was rejected by every major publisher in the United States, but Fawn would not give up until it was a #1 nonfiction bestseller that Oprah loved. Her newest book, Coming Back, was released by St. Martin's Press in January of 2021. This book shows how to turbocharge your career by changing the way you change. Fawn is an inspiring storyteller and a life adventurer. She's learned plenty the hard way and is as authentic as they come. She's interviewed hundreds of the most accomplished leaders of our times, include famous CEOs, prime ministers, presidents, Nobel Peace Prize winners, scientists, Academy Award winners, and many other trailblazers who revealed that success is born in risk, and power comes from consciously disabling your doubt and self-esteem issues. This episode is sponsored by the Career Pivot community, but we're going to skip any promotion this week. Without any delay, let's get to my discussion with Fawn Germer. Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast. I have the real joy of having Fawn Germer, who is the author of Coming Back: How to Win the Job You Want When You've Lost the Job You Need. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. It's nice to see you, Mark.
Your publicist sent me the book. I picked it up, and the first thing that really slapped me in the face was the whole discussion around experience is dead, and it's all about relevance.
Yeah.
So tell me what you mean by relevance.
Well, I think first we have to say what I mean by experience is dead, because that's probably the hardest thing about being middle-aged and looking for other employment or better employment or advancement at work. And that is that you're constantly being insulted. And you've got this whole wealth of experience. You've worked hard your whole life. You've delivered. You're great at what you do. And nobody cares. And that is excruciating, because you would think that would count for everything. And it counts for so little that the people who are hiring, when you start going off saying, oh, but I've got all this experience, They just think that means you've got old, useless, irrelevant experience. They don't even care if you are the absolute best person for the job today. They have to know that you're the best person for the job in 5 years and 10 years. And that just comes by showing a continued effort to make yourself relevant. So, I'm in that age group too. And we got out of college thinking that we had this set of skills that would guide us from that point all the way to the end of our careers. And in our parents' generation, that was true. Things didn't change quite so fast. And as all of us know, they change at a breakneck pace at this point. And they change so fast that if you're waiting for your company to train you or tell you what you need to know, you're already irrelevant. And it is on us to constantly search and look up our professions on Google and say, trends in let's say you're in the insurance business, trends in the insurance business industry, and trends for artificial intelligence in the insurance industry, how robotics are being used in the insurance industry, how blockchain, how big data, how machine learning is impacting the insurance industry. So you want to look all these things up to see what's coming. And when you know what's coming, and it's not that hard to do that research, you're talking a couple of hours. Once you have an idea of what is coming, then you know where your deficiencies are and what you have to study on your own. And it absolutely is something you have to take responsibility for. And a lot of people don't like hearing that because it sounds like hard work. Well, it's hard work, but it's not near as hard as we tell ourselves that it is.
Well, it's similar. We were talking right before, before we started this interview, the fact that, I live in Mexico and my wife and I are both learning Spanish. And well, I've spoken German. I tried to learn Mandarin, but my wife has never spoken another language. And she's working her butt off learning Spanish. And it's hard work. But by the way, it's good for her brain.
Oh, it does. It keeps you young, doesn't it?
I've been writing about disruption that's coming out of the pandemic. And disruption is hitting everything.
Right.
And, the example I use is over Christmas, I bought a new bicycle. I bought a Trek bicycle. And I probably bought the only size 60 bike in all of Mexico.
You're a tall man. Listen, I know a lot about bicycles. You're a tall man.
And
I'm a 52 Trek.
Okay. And so the problem there was, I said, can I order something? And they said, nope, we don't know when we're going to get anything out of China because every bike is manufactured in China now. And and people going, and I've had people go, what? Yeah, there's a shipping container problem right now. All the containers are in other places of the world. So how are you going to solve that? In your book, you talk about framing yourself around your relevance. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. So again, they want to know that you're going to be driving them into the future. And that means that right now you have to be able to demonstrate that you have the insatiable curiosity to make yourself relevant. And that means you are always reading and consuming information that's going to make you a more viable person in the workplace. So you're reading the Wall Street Journal and the Harvard Business Review and Inc. and Fast Company and Wired and all these things, but not every article. You're just checking out the summaries and reading what's important enough to read the whole article and getting an idea of the landscape. So that shows you've got the curiosity to stay present. And then when you see there's something that's going to impact your career, and believe me, your career is going to be impacted, you then make the leap from magazines and from YouTube over to Coursera.org or edX.org, where you can take classes from professors at Harvard and Yale and Berkeley and all these great schools for free. So you can take a class in artificial intelligence or in blockchain or whatever it is that you're going to need to know, and you'll learn the latest, greatest stuff. And the first one I took was with MIT, and it was a class in innovation. And being the good student I always was, I started to prepare for the test. And then I realized it doesn't matter what I get on the test. I can flunk the test. I don't need the credit. I've got my degrees. I just need the learning. And so pressure was off. In fact, I don't even have to complete the class if I don't want. I need to know what I need to know. So I took this class, and I've taken many since, with the understanding that it's for the knowledge. And some people pay because they want a certificate that says they took a class through Harvard. That's just a bunch of BS. Just go take the class for free and figure out which classes are going to be most relevant. And the reason you have to do this is that there was a recent study by Oxford University that estimates that in the next 10 years, 47% of our jobs, 47% are going to vanish. And you're going to be replaced by robots and technology and all of this stuff. And so the person who's going to stay employed is going to be the one who's saying, what's happening with this technology? How am I going to use that to my advantage? And you don't have to be a programmer. You just need to know what this stuff does so that you can apply it to what you're doing. So when you think about the resistors, the great resistors that were so evident, and I write about this a bit in my book. Great example is when online shopping started to appear. And you had all of these retailers, and many of the old school ones stood firmly saying, no, bricks and mortar, we have to have stores. And then as the companies started to shift and say, no, we have to go online, the resistors still were adamant. No, we have to do it this way. And then they poo-pooed it, and they pooed themselves out of relevance and out of the jobs. And there will be times when you may resist something, be the first to say, oh, I was wrong about that. That sure caught on. Let me learn it and master it. And, I don't want to go into a monologue here, but there's one more thing I want to say is that most of us who are over 50 are technologically behind, even if we think we're not. We are. And I know somebody who had been out of the workplace a long time, was trying to get back in. And I said, well, how are your tech skills? She said, I am so tech savvy. She goes, I got a millennial for a kid. And I'm thinking, okay, you fool. If you think that has prepared you for dealing with the very immense impact of what technology is doing today and into the future, you're just totally delusional. So for those who are listening, that can sound very intimidating, because if you're honest and you realize you're behind, your biggest fear is, how in the hell am I ever going to catch up? And the way you catch up is by learning one thing and then another, and understanding that, you got a few months of work before you have it mastered, but it can be mastered. And I always give this example, blockchain. Okay. So, Mark, are you good with blockchain?
You betcha.
Okay.
I'm a recovering engineer.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
There's a 12-step program for that.
Right. And I probably need to be on the anti-12-step program for that, because I could not understand blockchain to save my life. It's very complicated. The idea that a piece of data travels and that it can be used to fuel a supply chain or a currency. And I just couldn't get it. So I read a bunch of articles about blockchain and never got it. So I thought, okay, I'll go to YouTube. And I started watching all these YouTube videos about blockchain, and I still couldn't understand it. And then I found the article on how to teach blockchain to a 5-year-old. It was a 4-minute video. And when I watched it, I understood it. And that's what we have to do is get our understanding at the easiest level, so that then if we want to read something else, we read something else. And we want to do this in a way so that the learning is stimulating, challenging, and fun, not a chore, because we have to do this all the way until we die. Even if we're not working, we have to stay relevant.
Yeah, give you an idea. My last job was teaching people how video protocols go through corporate firewalls.
Oh,
barf.
Let me go get my no-doser, right? Wow.
That's why I don't do that anymore. I just said, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah, I think I'll go live down in Mexico and have a good life, right?
But anyway, yeah, I worked for a predecessor of Zoom. So you've now gained the knowledge. What do you do next?
Oh, you network like crazy, because if you're older, let's be honest, all these companies claim they don't discriminate. They do discriminate. It's very important to understand why. And that is because they assume that as you're older, you are not tech agile, that you've stopped learning, that you're not curious. So you've got to find someone who brings you in outside the algorithm of an online application. So if you're counting on an online application to deliver you, it's going to be tough. And yes, that happens once in a while, but that's a Powerball hit. What it takes is a network. And the good thing is it's easy to network now. That because of LinkedIn, you can find people at the companies where you'd like to work and you add them. And the worst thing you can do is add somebody to your network and then immediately ask for something. You cannot do that. That is just so, unless you have such a heartfelt explanation and plea. But I get things every day from people. Oh, thanks for the connection. Let me know how I can help you do X, Y, and Z. And then you can pay me money. And it's like, and you know what I do when that happens? I delete them from my contacts. Because if that's how you do it, you're somebody who doesn't understand the craft of networking, which is really about building relationships. So you get these people added in, you comment on their posts, you might forward something to them saying, I saw your other post and I thought you might be interested in this, start a dialogue. And then you say, I've been pretty interested in your company for a while. What are the odds of us doing coffee and Zoom so I could find out about how to break in there? And then you treat them as relationships, not just business contacts. See them as equals and find out about them, find out what you have in common, connect as friends, and then start leveraging those friendships and asking for favors. Because I cannot tell you how many times I have seen senior executives say to each other, hey, who do you know who can do X, Y, or Z? Who do you know? And you just want to be the person that they say, oh, you should talk to, and it's somebody in their network. But your odds, and think about the online applications, is there are a lot of jobs filled that way. Let's not deny that. But even if you are 25 years old and applying through that process, it is excruciating because there's so much competition. So the network is always the way to get yourself delivered. And then the other thing about networking is that once you have a strong relationship with someone and you need that person to do a favor for you, you make it very clear what you need. And you send an email, say in the subject line, personal favor, and then say, hey, there is an opening at your company. Can you please walk my resume over to so-and-so? Or I guess it would have to be done electronically right now because we're all home. But can you get my resume? And then can you make an electronic introduction and ask that person to just see me for a few minutes on Zoom? That's what you need. You need that moment.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was working for the predecessor to Zoom, Lifesize, during the Great Recession, and we were hiring, and I had people coming into me going, oh, can you help me with this XYZ job? And I had no problem walking over to the recruiter. And one time a gentleman said, I walked over to the recruiter and I got to know her real well. And she said, oh, his resume is pretty good. I'll forward it over. And the manager kicked it back. And he emailed me back, says, how come I got rejected? So I went over to the recruiter and asked, and and the manager said, well, he didn't have skill A, B, and C. And the guy, when he came back, he says, wow, that's valuable.
Oh, it is.
Right?
It is. And that's, well, what you say is really important because your lack of certain skills will hurt you. And the way that you get ahead of that is you start looking at the job postings that you see online for jobs that are at least one level above you, if not two. And those are the skills they want you to have at the lower level. Absolutely. And then you go get those skills. And you don't have to be an expert. You just have to be able to demonstrate familiarity.
And for those of you who listened to my episode of about a month ago with Mac Pritchard, and he has the Specialty Job Board Max list. When he was looking for or to replace an employee, he didn't post the job. So
what's that say, right?
Right. That's where it's absolutely critical. Also, if you go back and listen to the episode I did with Tom Singer, where essentially he's a full-time public speaker whose business, as you know, completely died, in 3 days in March.
It's sucking for air. Yeah, that's right.
Right. And so he's had about 100 conversations with people over the last 6 months and he says, I'm going to talk to a smart person every day. And he says, here's my situation. What do you think I should do? And he says, out of 100 people, he's gotten 5 good ideas. So this is kind of like sales prospecting.
Wow.
Not everyone's going to be able to help you, but if you put yourself out and be honest and vulnerable, and I think there was a chapter in your book where you talked about knowing exactly what you want and ask for it.
And do not sound desperate, even if you are.
I have the mantra. I've done tons of talks with product managers. And one of the things I always say is, if you don't ask, you often don't get.
Yep. Don't ask, don't get.
So therefore, what do you want?
Right. And the other thing is, I know there are people listening to this who don't know and they're uncertain. And the only advice I say is just listen. I just have this absolute faith that the universe will always tell you what you need to know. And the greatest example of that was that, I quit my career as a journalist in 1999 to write my first book, because I'd interviewed these great leaders and all of them said, you have to take a risk and bet on yourself. And I decided I was going to take the risk of quitting my job to write my book, never imagining that it would get rejected by every major US publisher. So there I am, really a starving author trying to figure out, what am I going to do? And I persevered, and people like you, that's so important. That book was a bestseller. It was an Oprah book, right? But I didn't know that at this time. And while I am wallowing in what seems like failure, someone I knew said, well, you ought to be a professional speaker. And I said, you can get paid for that? She goes, oh yeah, they get a lot of money. And so I looked it up, and sure enough, you got paid for that. And I thought, well, I could do that. And that launched the most fulfilling, fun, exciting career that I never even saw coming. I mean, think about it. I used to be an investigative reporter. So everything was negative. People were running to get away from me. I just kicked butt, right? I mean, it was just really tough and aggressive. Name one other investigative reporter who becomes a motivational speaker. There was no way I would have seen that for myself. But when someone says something, make sure you listen and then make sure you follow up, because that was the thing. I could have heard her say that and then just ignored it. But I always try to see and hear the messages I'm getting from the universe and always be open to that.
Well, one of the things I formed my online community about was so people could see other people and going, you're doing what?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, that's a great advantage.
So if you go back, I had Russ Eanes on the podcast, who now has a business. He was the executive director for Menno Media, which was the publishing arm of the Mennonite Church, which I claim he got hit with a double whammy. Both his industry and profession were dying, religion and publishing. He took a year off, hiked the Camino Trail, wrote a book about it, used as a basis for him now writing at least a book a year, and then starting his self-publishing business. And people go, what? You can do that? And there's so many ways today that you can make money. The world is changing fast.
And let me tell you, it's changing so fast that the people who aren't pivoting right are taking advantage of the people who need to pivot. And this is something that's just been grating on my nerves because I had a book come out a month ago. And so I am being contacted by a bunch of people who want help marketing their books. And there's people who are wanting to become professional speakers. And what's happened is you've got people selling people packages to self-publish books that cost $15,000 or $20,000 when you can do it for $85. And then you've got, somebody said this just last week. She paid somebody $27,000 at age 60 to get trained as a professional speaker so she can have a speaking career. And the speaking industry is in collapse right now. Everything's going virtual. There will be conferences and events again, but it will never be at the scale that it was. And the newbies, unless you've got something that no one else can deliver, the reality is if you're 60 years old, it's not going to happen. And I'm saying this as somebody who's 60, right? That is the reality. You have to be established at this point. So there are people who are preying on people's hopes and dreams. And the point I'm trying to make is take responsibility for what you want to learn and study on your own. Do your own research, take your own courses. Everything is right there. And the one who was paid $27,000 for some charlatan to teach her how to speak, I said, no, just go buy Doug Stevenson's book, Storytelling Theater. That's what you need. And then join the National Speakers Association. And there's always someone who can tell you, if you do this magic thing, I will teach you. And that's why I say those aren't the courses you want. You want to go to Coursera.org and edX.org for these courses that are coming from these academics who know their stuff. And then when I release my course on how to get a job, yeah, you're going to want that. But I'm just,
yeah.
Honestly, because that's a good way to communicate information. But here's the point. There's not going to be anything in that course that's not in the book. And you can find things if you just look for the source material. You do not have to leverage yourself to find another career to other people. You may have to invest in other skills and in true certifications, but you do not do this to the people who will take advantage of you, because those people are out there. They're in almost every industry, and avoid.
So I'm 60 years old. I've been spit out. I haven't had to look for a job for 20 years. What's your one piece of advice, or what's the best piece of advice you can give?
Take the next step. The thing about careers is that they are never, ever a straight shot to the top. It goes up, it goes down. You have good years, you have bad years. So don't measure yourself by what you did that came easily. Measure yourself by who you became when it got tough. And when it's tough, you always have to hear that voice in the back of your head saying, take the next step. And if something is really hard that you've got to do, break it down into 20 steps and then just do one and check it off your list. And every day have something else you can do. And as long as you don't give up, you'll get where you need to go. You take one step. And I always use this visual for you. I am a big beach walker, and like 10 to 13 miles. And that was the background of that book, Work Life Reset. My parents died, and 2 months apart, I had a big breakup. I had the year from hell. And when it came time to find my way out of that, I did a walk where I live here in Pinellas County, Florida, starting at our southernmost beach, and every day doing, really that was 7 to 13 miles a day, depending on where it was and what. And I would walk to my bike to my car, go home, go to sleep, next day start right where I left off. So when I was done, I did over 60 miles. And some of these I had to kayak out to islands to walk and rent boats or get rides on ferries so that I could do it. But that was how I rebooted my life. And I learned through that I have really bad feet. Now, I love my feet because they get me where I'm going, but they feel pain at mile 7. They start screaming, and the further I go, the more they scream. And what I learned was, if I just take the next step with my left foot and the next step with my right, and left and right for miles, left, right, I get where I need to go. And that is what I want people to keep in their minds. If you just take the next step and then the next and then the next, you get there. The reason people are so frustrated and feeling like failures is that they're letting the other people's misery become their reality. They think there's no opportunity. They think it will never happen. And then they slow down and then they stop. If you just keep moving forward, one step, another step, then you get where you need to go.
That's a great way to close out this interview. I like closing things out on a positive note. Fawn, if someone wanted to reach out and touch you virtually, because we do have to have social distancing,
right? How
might they do that?
Okay, the first thing is you stop at my website, which is fawngermer.com. So that's FAWNGERMER.com. And then I've got some freebies.
I'll put all of them in the show notes.
Yeah, so that you can get how to reboot your career during COVID and taking the next step. So those are 2 things I can send you for free. And I love hearing from people. And on my website, you've got links to all of my social media. I'm everywhere and making peace with that, like most of you are. And I love hearing from people. And if you're having trouble, just keep moving forward. Don't give up. It will get better.
Well, Fawn, thank you very much for being on the Repurpose Your Career podcast.
Well, thanks a lot, Mark. I wish you the best down there in beautiful Mexico.
I had a lot of fun speaking with Fawn and really enjoyed her book. Take a moment, go to careerpivot.com, sign up for the weekly Career Pivot Insights newsletter, which is sent out every Sunday. You will get a weekly update on this podcast, white papers, and new blog posts. When you subscribe, you'll receive my latest white paper, Ageism, the Last Acceptable Bias. While there, do not forget to check out the Career Pivot community, which can be found at careerpivot.com/community. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Look for Career Pivot on LinkedIn. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. You will find all the show notes at careerpivot.com/episode-327. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Podbeam, Overcast, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, and lots of other places where podcasts can be found. In fact, this podcast can be found on the Repurpose Your Career podcast channel on YouTube. Hope to see you next Monday for another episode of Repurpose Your Career podcast.